Okay, so let's pick up where we left off, and we're going to do a couple more things to this animation. So currently we have the ship kind of popping up there and then shooting off the screen, right? And so what we're going to add to this is a little bit of particles coming out of the bottom of it, and we also, if we go to our layers menu here, you'll see that we have this flag stuff layer. And if I turn that on, you'll see that we have a flag, a pole, and you'll also see that we have a couple of these little tick marks here in space. These are called locators. And so we'll come back to why we have those, but first let's get a texture on this flag. What do you say? So I'm going to right click and I'm going to assign a new material, just so we have a new material for this, and just because it's a pretty easy one, doesn't really need any highlights or anything, we'll just choose the Lambert. Okay, so we can go out here to the Lambert, and we know we can change its color to whatever we wanted it to. If we wanted to make it red, we could, right? But let's say what we really wanted to do was apply a texture on here. Well, currently I already have if I go to my UV editor, currently I already have my UVs sort of laid out in a way that I can see them, right? I can see like how they align to everything. And if I were to apply a new texture on this, it would line up with this grid, right? And so let's go ahead and just export out these UVs, and we can take that into Photoshop and we can create our own texture for that. So what we have to do is we have to select the object, go Polygon, UV Snapshot, and so we're going to export this out using numbers that look like this. Now, where do those numbers come from? So let me kind of show you this really quick. Some of you have probably played this game before. Let's restart it here so you can look at it. It's just called 2048, and it's just a game where as you move stuff around, you see that when two numbers touch each other, 2 and 2 touch each other, they double and get 4. When 4 and 4 touches each other, you get 8, 8 and 8 is 16. And so these are all powers of 2, right? These are, 2 times 2 is, I'm sorry, yeah, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. So it's just doubling every time, right? And so we get this series of numbers. We get 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096. So these are all numbers that you will actually start to memorize. And the reason for that is because these are powers of 2. This is how the computer really likes to think about things. Like it makes it easier, and you get numbers that fall into this binary system, 0 and 1. That's 2 numbers. And it falls into this binary system a little more cleanly. And when you have to do millions of processes, it starts speeding. It starts becoming faster if you're using numbers that are powers of 2. And so even though this would look better to us if it were 2000 instead of 2048, it looks better to the computer as 2048. It understands it better, and it just works better. So we're going to use that number, and that's going to be the size of our image. It's 2048 by 2048 pixels, right? It's making this square image. And you can choose what color you want the output to be. I'll go ahead and leave it as red right now. And when I hit OK, it's going to save out that texture map, right? So it saves out a JPEG into our images folder, right? And you can see that I've actually done this a few times, but it's just saving us out a PNG. Now the reason I use PNG is because they're transparent, right? And so this is very similar to what we actually get in here. And if we zoom in there, you'll see that it's actually transparent, which the only thing that's not transparent is those red lines. And so we can start adding new layers underneath here that we can color on, right? So if I start coloring black on here, you get the idea. I get this shape, right? And I can use this as a template to see where my textures need to be, right? How I need to texture my flag. Okay, so I've actually already got one here. I'll turn that off. So basically, I just made this little Kermit the Frog flag for Kermitonia because he needs his own planet. Again, I'm using copyrighted materials here just as an example. Not this is something you should avoid doing in your own final work, but just maybe you would paint your own flag for whatever it is you want it to be. Now, before I send this back to Maya, I'm going to want to turn off my grid layer. Okay, and so since it's transparent, I just have it on top. That's my UV layer, not grid. I want to go ahead and turn my UVs off, and then this is the image I would save. I go File, Save As, and we're going to save this in our source images, probably as a targa. And so if I save a targa, you see I actually already have one here. I'm going to just call it Kermitonia and hit Save and say, yeah, that's fine. Okay, and so when I go back to my flag here, and I have this texture where I've mapped in the color red, instead I can map in an image by clicking on this little checkerboard. And if I click on that checkerboard and go to File, it's going to ask me which file. And I'm going to say the Kermitonia color file. Hit Open, and so it should just map it right on there. So now we're seeing this issue with it though. So it's actually, if I flipped to this side, we would be able to see Kermitonia correctly, but this is the side we're actually viewing it from. Right, and so let's go back to our UV editor, Windows UV editor. Now, the reason we're seeing this issue, let's turn RGB on. The reason we're seeing this issue is because if I grab this UV, although I kind of thought that UV right here in this corner was over on this side, it's not. It's actually right there, right? And so I can actually grab all of these UVs and say polygon flip. I'm going to choose that box. I'm going to flip them horizontally. So if I apply that, it basically just flipped all of my UVs in space there. And so, I mean, we can still manipulate these UVs if we wanted to. Or we can still move that around, or, let's say I wanted, just rotate it even, or scale it. Like, all of those things are still things I could do to my UVs. But for now, I'm pretty happy with this. Right. So I'm actually going to map another image in here too. If I go back to my Photoshop file and turn off my color layer, turn my UVs back on, I made another layer here where basically I've just made some white and black, right? And so let's look at what that's actually going to do in Maya if I map this into something like transparency. So currently, right now, transparency is black, right? And that means that's actually kind of the wrong way of looking at it. Yeah, but we can turn up and down our transparency, and so if we mapped in a checkerboard, you would see that the black or like the white areas, black areas, white should be visible, black should be transparent. It's actually flipping it. I don't know why it's doing that. And so you'll see that we're getting this like transparency in there. But let's break that. If I go back to my original material here and right click on transparency and say break connections. So now that image isn't or that checkerboard isn't mapped in there, but I can map in that file that I just created with my Kermitonia trans here, right? And so if I exported that out, you'll see that I kind of get this ripped edge along the flag, right? So it makes it look a little bit more like rough. Now the model itself is still there, we just can't see that area of it. Right? And so we can do stuff like that to sort of rough it up and make it look a little more weathered, right? Okay, so at this point I'm going to go ahead and save my file. So I'll save scene as, and we'll call this forbid 2. Save, and that way we just have our progress saved, because now we're going to start working on some dynamics for this flag. So under the effects setting is where we're going to need to be for this, or the effects menu for this. You'll notice that we have a lot of things in here that have the letter N in front of it. That N stands for nucleus. Nucleus is Maya's simulation or effects or dynamics and physics like software that's just built into it. And Maya actually has a couple of those. It also has Bullet, and it has sort of this older default version of some of the simulation elements, but one of the things that's really nice in here is nCloth, and nCloth works really pretty well. So I'm just going to click nCloth, and I'm going to tell Maya that I want this to be an nCloth object. So I'm going to hit create nCloth and hit play, and you'll see that now it falls. Right? You'll also see I get this little warning: nucleus evaluation skipped frame changed too large. And so because that happened, what's actually happening is this is trying to play it back. If I right click, you'll see my playback speed it actually wasn't set to anything, but it was probably trying to play it real time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say play every frame with a max of real time. Meaning our timing may not be right, but Maya's going to evaluate every frame. And if it doesn't do that, if we try to scrub, like Maya can skip frames, and you see the simulation doesn't work as well, right? We get this error. And so if we just hit play with every frame, it's going to evaluate every frame. And it may not play back in our viewport at exactly the correct speed, but it will look better. Now, we're getting some issues here, and the biggest one being that it's just falling straight down like a plank through the floor, right? And so we're going to want to pin it to something. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a vertex, grab that top vertex. I'm going to grab that top locator, and basically, by holding shift, and basically I'm going to tell Maya, I want you to pin that vertex to that locator. We're going to use an N constraint to do that. So it's a nucleus constraint. And so if I click that and do transform constraint, now when I hit simulation, you'll see that it's going to hold on to that and sort of flop this piece of fabric around, right? So we're getting something a little closer now. I'm going to go ahead and do that with the bottom corner too. Select that, vertex, select that constraint, transform constraint. And so now when I hit play, we're getting a little bit more of a flag flopping around feel to it, right? So we can play with this fabric quite a bit to get different results. So one of the things we can look at is this this is the nCloth shape 1, right? Which if I click on that, we get a lot of this different options here of how to change this, right? We can make it more bouncy, we can make more friction on it. And there's a bunch of presets in here too. So right now it's falling just sort of like with the default settings, but if I replaced that with heavy denim and hit play, it's going to fall a little differently. You see it's a little stiffer now, right? Or I could replace it with something crazy like concrete. Let's restart. Let's see, it feels like it's completely stiff. It'll also bend a little bit more with concrete. Like if you were to drop it on something heavy, it would get like a crinkle to it. And so these are all things, and we can do some really crazy ones if we wanted to. We could do lava. And so lava is going to, right. And so I'm just going to set mine to something like either t-shirt or maybe would do a rubber sheet or something like that. So I think, let's see what that looks like. To me, rubber sheet's a little floppy right now. So maybe I'll do it the other way around. Maybe I'll do t-shirt. T-shirt's a little bit more like the default thing we had earlier. And then maybe I'll just add just a little bit of rubber sheet. So I'll add maybe like 25% rubber sheet. So now when I hit play, I'm kind of happy with that weight. Now this doesn't feel very appropriate because it's just sort of falling and dangling, right? And this is, I want to get some interestingness to it. So even though it's a small planet, people think of it as a moon with no atmosphere when they look at this, I'm sure. Let's go ahead and give it some wind anyway. Let's go ahead and pretend like it has its own atmosphere and like there's some wind blowing around in here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to fields. Okay, and so the one I'm going to use is an air field. Now if I click on that, you see it creates it over here at this point, but it's actually the distance of it that is that can be a problem. So I'm going to bring it as close as I can to my flag. It doesn't have to be right on it because we can adjust that distance too, but I also want a little bit of a visual representation of where it is. Right? Currently, if I hit play, it's going to do something like that. Right? Let's replay that. So I'm not necessarily sure where the wind is blowing. It's not blowing very hard apparently. And if I turn my magnitude up, like, oh, it's blowing straight upward, right? And you'll see that it kind of blows it upward. And that's because we have this direction. And so you'll see that there's 3 numbers in here, and these represent X, Y, and Z. And so it's blowing in a positive 1 direction on the Y, which is, as we see here from our locator, straight up. So I'm actually just going to set that to 0, and what I really want it to do is blow in the Z direction. If I hit that, I get that kind of, whoa, there we go, it's blowing really hard now, right? And then I can slowly start to turn that down until I get sort of the simulation I want. Get that up to like, let's try 11. There we go. There we go, we're getting a little bit of like a crinkle to it now. See that? Now, the only problem with that is on frame 1, it's stiff as a board, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my beginning of my animation to -50. Okay, and if I go all the way back to -50 and start playing, you're going to see nothing actually happens until frame 0. And frame 0 is where the animation starts, or where the simulation starts. And so if I click this, I'm actually going to have to go to my nucleus here. This is the nucleus right in the beginning, or right at the very center here. And you see this is the nucleus 1 node. This is sort of the thing that is making physics happen. And it's got some things, like it's got like the gravity, it's got an overall wind speed and a direction. So I guess we could probably do that in one direction if we wanted to. But if we scroll down here, you'll see time attributes. And currently, its start frame is set to 1. Right? I'm going to set that to -50. And go back to the beginning. And so now if I hit play, you'll see that by the time it gets to frame 1, it's already kind of, it looks like the wind's been blowing it even before we started recording. Right? And so that's what we want. We want, if we start on frame 0, we want it to look like it's already in the process of being manipulated. Right? And so if we play through that, we get a little bit of wrinkling and crinkling before that takes off and shoots through the air. Now the problem with this is if I make even the slightest change to something, if I change the position of this will simulate differently. Right? And eventually we're going to be like, no, that's what I want it to look like right there, right? And I want it to stay like that. And so to make that happen, we're going to have to cache it. So it's not C-A-S-H, it's C-A-C-H-E, cache, right? Like the cache on your computer that kind of remembers where you've been on the internet, and so if I select that flag and go to in cache and create new cache, what it's going to do is it's going to create an object, or it's going to create a file for each frame of the animation. Okay, so I'm going to say create new cache, and I'm going to do an in object. I'm going to hit that, and it's going to oh, so I've already cached it before in the past for a different one, and I'm just going to say replace existing. And so it's just going to copy over those. And you're going to see that now I can scrub through this. I don't have to worry about it. It's actually permanent now. It's permanent, but it can still be deleted, and you can go back to simulating by, you can delete your cache or replace the cache. We can do all those things. But currently, this is this is going to stay this way. And if we render it, we know we're going to get these exact frames. Okay, and so that's an important part of this that we have to do to make sure we get something consistent. Okay, so the flag is pretty much done now. Let's go ahead and look at that. And we can, now that we're done there, we can actually go back to frame 0 and decide that's all we want to really do is frame 0 through the end, right? Now the last little thing we're going to do is we're going to add some particles. Now particles will drive up our render time ridiculously. Currently, if I render this, I think it's taking like probably under a minute. If I add a lot of particles in here, our render time is going to go to several minutes. It was actually taking a little less than a minute. It's because it didn't render it. What happened? Oh, let's not worry about that right now. Anyway, so because we're doing that, if I'm just going to play blast this out when I'm done instead of render it. And in the long term, I would render it. But so I'm going to go back to my camera 1, because this is where we're going to see our animation from. And so we want to make sure that it looks good from here. So if we go to effects, wait, I'm sorry. End particles, I'm sorry. So we can go to end particles and we can create an emitter. Now we're going to create the emitter here. We don't want to use the legacy particles. Those are the older ones. So we're going to do create emitter. You're going to see it creates a little ball there. And if I just hit play on this, you'll start to see that you can't really see very much on that, can you? If I were to go to my perspective view and go inside the moon and hit hit play from the beginning, you'll see that it's starting to spit out particles to the floor, right? And so we want that to stay with the ship, actually. You see how it's kind of doing that? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my outliner again, and I'm going to take this emitter, and I'm just going to parent that underneath the ship. So I'm going to middle click, drag that on top of the ship. And so now you'll see that it's going to be pumping those out, and then it's going to do that, and then fly off, right? And so now I can go back to my camera 1. Now, particles are a lot of work. If I click on my end particle object here, and go to we have the end particle shape, you can see all these different tabs that we can change things about the particles, right? We can change the count. We can change how long they stay alive. Right? If we want it to not stay alive, but we want it to stay alive is how long they stay on the screen. And currently they're living forever. We could do a random range lifespan of, say, 10 or something like that. And that's going to, they're basically all going to die after about 10 frames, I think. Maybe we'll do 2 so we can see the example a little bit better. It doesn't really seem like it's changing it, does it? Or constant, maybe constant lifespan of 2 makes more sense. There we go. We see it a little bit better now with 1. You can see that they sort of die after time. So we could do like a random lifespan. If we're still playing, it doesn't actually update in here sometimes. Do a random lifespan of something like 1.2, right? And then make that randomness like 1. Let's see what that looks like. And so now they're gonna slowly start to fade away over time, right? Now there's other things we can change in here, like the particle size. But if I change that, you're actually going to see nothing's happening, and that's because we're rendering these little tick marks instead of something that has a size. And so if I scroll down here to shading, I think it is, yeah, shading, you're seeing that what we're actually rendering is points. Now I can change that to numeric, where it's going to render a bunch of random numbers. I can do multi-points, which is a single point that duplicates itself, and if we do that, we can make it, we can sort of spread that out and make it like a single point that has multiple duplicates of itself. And that looks a little bit better, maybe as some sort of particles, right? We could change it to spheres. Let's look what that looks like. Right. And if we do it as spheres, then we have to start playing around with some of the other things here. We could do it as some of these down here at the bottom, and they're kind of nice. This cloud is nice. The problem with that is we're currently rendering with Mental Ray, and Maya. This wants to render with Maya software. That's what that SW is there. And so we can play around that. And again, I said we're just play blasting, so we can play around with the opacity and a whole bunch of different things in order to get a completely different result. That's all I'm really going to cover on particles right now, because there's a lot to them. In fact, a whole class to them, pretty much. But you can kind of get the idea of kind of how they work, and just play with it and see if you can get a decent looking render in your viewport here, knowing that you're probably going to have to do a lot of work to actually get a decent looking render to come out of Maya. But yeah, and this can be a lot of fun just to play around with these settings and see what you get, and if it messes up, just delete it and add another one. So hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.